In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a species that defies every law of survival the universe has written. They are not the strongest, nor the smartest, nor the most technologically advanced. They live brief lives on a small blue world, plagued by conflicts and limitations that should have destroyed them eons ago. Yet when the Zephyrian Empire, masters of 1,000 worlds, faced their darkest hour, it was these fragile beings who answered their call. When the ancient Kethmori, with their crystalline perfection and millennial lifespans, were brought to their knees, it was humanity that stood beside them. When the machine consciousness of the Nexus Collective calculated their own extinction, it was human irrationality that found the impossible solution. The galaxy learned something that day, something that would reshape the very foundation of interstellar civilization. They learned that gratitude, when wielded by the right species, becomes more powerful than any weapon, more binding than any treaty, and more dangerous than any force the universe had ever known. This is the story of how a simple thank you became the catalyst for humanity's rise from a forgotten backwater world to the guardians of galactic civilization, and why every species that ever underestimated human loyalty learned to regret it. The emergency beacon cut through the silence of deep space like a scream in the dark. Captain Sarah Chun stared at the tactical display aboard the UES Defiance, her weathered hands gripping the command chair as the alien distress signal translated across her screens. The message was simple, desperate, and written in a language that shouldn't have existed anymore. Help us. The Devourers have returned. Zephyr Prime is lost. This is our final transmission. Chin's first officer, Commander Marcus Rivera, leaned over her shoulder, his dark eyes reflecting the crimson glow of the emergency lights. Captain, that's Zephyrian script. But, according to our records, their civilization fell 300 years ago. Sarah knew the history well. Every human did. The Zephyrian Empire had once spanned 47 star systems, their crystalline cities floating in perfect harmony above giant atmospheres. They had been the galaxy's teachers, the peaceful scholars who had first made contact with Earth in 2157. When humanity had been nothing more than a curious species taking its first tentative steps into the void, the Zephyrians had shared their knowledge freely. Star charts, translation matrices, the basics of faster-than-light travel. Then, the Devourers had come. The Devourers weren't a species in any conventional sense. They were entropy given form, creatures of living darkness that consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing but cold void in their wake. When it had swept through Zephyrian space, the elegant empire had crumbled in mere decades. The few survivors had scattered to the cosmic winds, becoming nomads, their once great civilization reduced to fragmented fleets and fading memories. Sir, Lieutenant Torres called from the communication station, her voice tight with urgency. I'm picking up multiple beacon signatures from that sector. It's not just one ship, it's an entire fleet. Sarah's mind raced. 300 years was a long time in galactic terms. Civilizations rose and fell, alliances shifted, and the galaxy moved on. Earth had grown from a single system to a modest confederation of 12 colonies. They had made new friends, new enemies, new trade partnerships. The debt to the Zephyrians had become a footnote in history books, a pleasant story about first contact that children learned in school. But Sarah Chun remembered her grandmother's stories. Isabella Chun had been aboard the first human diplomatic vessel to visit Zephyr Prime. She had walked through those floating crystal gardens, had seen the impossible beauty of their orbital cities, had learned the Zephyrian meditation techniques that Isabella had passed down through 3 generations. Sarah could still remember her grandmother's voice, speaking the formal Zephyrian phrase for eternal gratitude, Veltar Nesh Kolani, until the stars grow cold. Plot an intercept course, Sarah commanded, her voice cutting through the bridge's tense atmosphere. Maximum burn. Rivera stepped closer, lowering his voice. Captain, with respect, we're a single heavy cruiser. If the Devourers are really back, we're not equipped for that kind of engagement. We should contact Fleet Command Request backup. Sarah turned to face her first officer, and he saw something in her eyes that made him step back. It wasn't recklessness or bravado. It was something deeper, more fundamental. It was the look of someone who understood that some debts transcended logic. 300 years ago, when humanity was barely capable of reaching our own moon with chemical rockets, the Zephyrians gave us the stars, she said quietly. They asked for nothing in return. When the Devourers came for them, we were too weak, too primitive to help. We watched from afar as they burned. She stood, moving to the main view screen where the star field stretched endlessly before them. I won't watch them burn again. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of preparation. The Defiance was a Sovereign-class heavy cruiser, one of humanity's newest designs. Her armor was composed of layered metamaterials that could absorb and redirect energy. Her weapons systems included both traditional kinetic railguns and experimental plasma cannons. She was built for deep space patrol and peacekeeping, not for fighting cosmic horrors that devoured star systems. But she would have to do. As they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, the scope of the crisis became clear. The Zephyrian fleet was massive, over 200 vessels of various sizes, from elegant diplomatic cruisers to massive colony ships. They were arranged in a defensive formation around a dying star that flickered erratically, its light growing dimmer with each pulse. "My God," whispered Torres. "Captain, energy readings are off the charts. That star, it's not dying naturally." The view screen shifted to focus on the stellar anomaly, and Sarah felt her blood freeze. Wrapped around the star like some impossibly vast serpent was something that defied description. It was darkness given substance, a writhing mass of shadows that fed on stellar matter itself. Tendrils of pure void stretched out from its central mass, drinking in the star's energy, leaving dead space in their wake. "The Devourer," Rivera breathed. "It's actually real." A new voice crackled over the communications array. Elderly, refined, speaking an accented standard that carried the musical quality of the Zephyrian language. "Unknown vessel. This is High Scholar Velnari aboard the Eternal Dawn. You must leave immediately. The Devourer will sense your presence. We cannot bear to watch another species fall because of our failures." Sarah activated the response channel. "High Scholar, this is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earthship Defiance. We received your distress call." The pause that followed stretched for nearly a minute. When Velnari's voice returned, it trembled with emotion. "Human? But that is impossible. Earth is 47 light years from here. Why would you come?" Sarah looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. They were young, mostly born into an era where humanity was respected among the galactic community. They had never known the uncertainty of those early years, when Earth had been just another primitive world on the galactic fringe. But they understood honor. They understood loyalty. "Because 300 years ago, you showed us the way to the stars," Sarah replied. "Veltor nesh koloni high skolif, until the stars grow cold." Another pause, longer this time. When Velnari spoke again, his voice was thick with wonder and something that might have been tears. "No one has spoken those words to me in 3 centuries. Captain Chun, you must understand, the Devourer cannot be fought with conventional weapons. It feeds on energy itself. Our greatest scholars have calculated that it would take the combined firepower of 50 galactic civilizations to even wound it." Sarah studied the tactical readouts flowing across her screens. The creature was massive beyond comprehension, its tendrils stretching across astronomical distances. But there was something else, something her sensors were picking up that didn't match the Zephyrian analysis. "High Scholar, your readings show the creature as a single entity. But my scans are detecting patterns, rhythmic pulses almost like a heartbeat. What if it's not one creature? What if it's a swarm?" The silence stretched longer this time. Sarah could almost hear the Zephyrian scholars conferring among themselves, their ancient wisdom wrestling with new possibilities. "Captain," Velnari's voice returned, sharp with sudden excitement, "you may have discovered something we missed. If the Devourer is indeed a collective consciousness, then perhaps a concentrated strike at its central coordination matrix might disrupt the entire swarm. Where? Sarah asked, already knowing the answer would be something impossible. At the very center of the stellar mass it's consuming. You would have to fly directly into the creature's core. Rivera was already shaking his head. Captain, that's suicide. No ship could survive in there. But Sarah was studying the tactical display with new eyes. The Defiance had been designed with humanity's greatest strength in mind, adaptability. While other species built ships for specific purposes, human engineering embraced flexibility. Their armor could be reconfigured mid-battle. Their weapons systems could be overcharged beyond normal parameters. Their life support systems could handle conditions that would kill most alien crews. Torres, can you route all available power to forward shields? Strip everything. Artificial gravity, backup life support, recreational systems. Yes, Captain, but the structural stress would be enormous. We'd have maybe 30 minutes before critical systems failure. 30 minutes, Sarah mused. Rivera, time a target if we burn straight through the creature's mass. Assuming we can maintain full thrust, 18 minutes. Sarah turned to address her entire bridge crew. I want everyone to understand what I'm asking. This is a volunteer mission. The odds of survival are minimal. But if we succeed, we might save not just the Zephyrian fleet, but every other species the Devourers would consume next. One by one, her officers nodded their agreement. Not because they were fearless, but because they understood something fundamental about humanity that the galaxy was still learning. When humans made friends, those friendships could span centuries. When they made promises, those promises could reshape the cosmos. Hi, Scholar. Sarah opened the channel again. We're going in. Whatever happens, tell the galaxy that humanity remembers its debts. As the Defiance began its impossible dive toward the creature's heart, Sarah thought about her grandmother's stories, about the crystal gardens of Zephyr Prime, and the gentle scholars who had given humanity the gift of the stars. 300 years was a long time to wait to repay a kindness. But some debts were worth the wait. The Defiance shuddered as it penetrated the outer edge of the Devourer's mass, reality itself seeming to twist around the ship's hull. The view screen flickered between normal space and something else entirely, a realm where physics bent to accommodate hunger itself. Sarah gripped her command chair as the artificial gravity struggled against forces that existed outside conventional understanding. Hull temperature rising, Torres reported, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Forward shields holding at 60%, but the energy drain is unlike anything in our databases. The creature's substance wasn't empty space as they had expected. It was filled with a kind of living darkness that pressed against their shields like water, but water that thought and hungered. Sarah could see movement in the blackness beyond their forward screens. Not the random drift of cosmic debris, but purposeful motion. The Devourer was aware of their presence. Captain, Rivera called from the tactical station, I'm reading massive energy buildups throughout the creature's mass. It's redirecting resources toward our position. Sarah had expected this. The Devourer had consumed entire civilizations by adapting to their tactics, learning from each encounter. But humanity had one advantage that previous victims might have lacked. They specialized in being unpredictable. Torres, begin random course variations. Keep our general heading, but make our approach pattern chaotic. Rivera, prepare to overcharge the plasma cannons beyond safe parameters. Sir, that could cause catastrophic overload. That's the idea, Sarah interrupted. If this thing learns from energy signatures, we need to give it something it can't categorize. As the Defiance twisted through its increasingly erratic flight path, Sarah opened a channel to the Zephyrian fleet. The signal was weak, distorted by the creature's interference, but Velnari's voice came through clearly enough. Captain Chun, our instruments show the Devourer is concentrating its attention on your vessel. The pressure on our perimeter defenses has decreased significantly. Good, Sarah replied, watching as her navigation officer plotted their increasingly complex course through the creature's interior. Hi, Scholar. I need to ask you something about your people's first encounter with this thing. Our historical records are incomplete. What would you know? When the Devourer first appeared in your space, how long did it take to consume your core worlds? The pause was longer than the communication delay should have accounted for. When Velnari spoke again, his voice carried centuries of pain. 73 standard days from first contact to the fall of Zephyr Prime. But, Captain, why does this matter now? Sarah studied the tactical display, where her ship appeared as a tiny dot moving through an impossibly vast organism. Because that's too fast. Something that size should take decades to position itself to consume a star system. Unless understanding struck her like a physical blow. She turned to Rivera with wide eyes. Marcus, what if this isn't just a creature that consumes energy? What if it's a creature that exists partially outside normal space-time? That would explain the rapid deployment, the way it seems to anticipate defensive measures. Rivera's hands flew over his console, running calculations. If you're right, then its central coordination matrix would exist in a dimensional pocket, anchored to our reality only at specific points. Torres, run a gravitational analysis of our current position. Look for spatial anomalies, places where the metric of space-time doesn't match what our instruments expect. The sensor sweep revealed something impossible. Deep within the creature's mass, approximately 6 minutes ahead of their current position, space itself was folded in ways that violated the laws of physics. A sphere of altered reality, roughly the size of Earth's moon, hung in the darkness like a tumor in the fabric of existence. That's it, Sarah whispered. That's the coordination matrix. It's not just controlling the swarm. It's existing partially in another dimension to coordinate attacks across multiple star systems simultaneously. The implications were staggering. If the Devourer could attack from outside normal space-time, then no conventional defense could stop it. Entire galactic civilizations could be consumed before they even realized they were under attack. But Sarah Chun had not become one of Earth Fleet's youngest captains by accepting the impossible. She had earned her rank by finding solutions where others saw only problems. Rivera, if we could destabilize the dimensional anchor, what would happen to the creature? Theoretical analysis suggests. Rivera paused, double-checking his calculations. Complete dimensional collapse. The creature would be ejected from our reality. Survivable ejection? Unknown. But, Captain, destabilizing a dimensional pocket from the inside requires more energy than we have available. We need to detonate our entire reactor core at point-blank range. Sarah nodded slowly. She had known from the moment they entered the creature's mass that survival was unlikely. But there was something else, something that had been nagging at the back of her mind since they began this impossible journey. Torres, how many ships are in the Zephyrian fleet? 217, sir. And what's the combined population? Torres consulted her readings. Approximately 4 million individuals, Captain. According to their transmissions, these represent the last survivors of their species. For million souls, the entire remaining population of a civilization that had given humanity the gift of the stars. Sarah thought about her grandmother's stories, about the gentle scholars who had shared their knowledge freely with a primitive species that had nothing to offer in return except curiosity and gratitude. The Defiance bucked as something vast moved past them in the darkness. Through the view screen, Sarah could see structures that defied description, organs of living shadow that pulsed with stolen starlight, neural networks that stretched across astronomical distances, feeding apparatus that could drain the energy from entire solar systems. Captain, Torres announced, we're approaching the dimensional anomaly. Energy readings are off the charts. As they drew closer, the creature's awareness of them intensified. Tendrils of darkness began reaching toward their ship, probing their shields with curious malevolence. The Defiance's defensive systems strained under the assault, armor plates glowing cherry red as they absorbed energies that should have been impossible. High Scholar, Sarah opened the channel to the Zephyrian fleet. I need you to understand something. We're about to attempt to destroy the creature's coordination matrix. If we succeed, the swarm will lose cohesion and Retreat to wherever these things come from. If we fail, Captain, Velnari's voice was gentle, understanding. You have already given us more than we dared hope for. For 3 centuries, we have lived as refugees, watching the galaxy forget our civilization ever existed. That you came at all, that you remember our friendship. This itself is a gift beyond measure. Sarah felt tears she didn't know she was holding back begin to flow. High Scholar, promise me something. When this is over, whatever the outcome, don't let the galaxy forget. Don't let them forget that when humanity gives its word, it keeps it. When humanity makes a friend, that friendship lasts forever. I promise, Captain Shun. The galaxy will remember. The dimensional pocket loomed ahead of them now, a sphere of impossible geometry that hurt to look at directly. Space-time itself was twisted into configurations that the human mind struggled to process. At its center, Sarah could see something that might have been the Devourer's true form. Not the vast creature of living shadow, but something smaller, more concentrated. Pure hunger given consciousness. All stop, Sarah commanded. Torres, transfer all remaining power to weapon systems. Rivera, prepare to overload the reactor core on my command. The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of overstressed systems and the occasional creak of hull metal under impossible stresses. Sarah looked around at her crew. Young faces that had volunteered to die for a debt that was older than any of them, for a friendship that had survived centuries. Has everyone recorded their personal messages? She asked quietly. Nods all around. Each crew member had spent the past few minutes recording final words for loved ones back home. Messages that would be transmitted automatically if their ship was destroyed. Good. Then, let's show this thing what human stubbornness looks like. The Defiance opened fire with everything it had. Plasma cannons, railguns, particle beams, and exotic matter torpedoes, all of it directed at the dimensional anchor point. The creature's response was immediate and overwhelming. Tendrils of darkness larger than city blocks lashed out at their ship, striking their shields with enough force to shatter moons. Shields down to 15%. Torres shouted over the sound of failing systems. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Rivera added. But the weapon's fire was having an effect. The dimensional pocket was beginning to destabilize, reality writhing as the anchor points that held it in normal space-time started to fail. The creature's true form was becoming visible now, a being of pure malevolence that existed in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on the life force of entire civilizations. Reactor overload ready, Rivera reported. Sarah took one last look at the tactical display. They were less than a kilometer from the dimensional anchor point, close enough for their reactor detonation to cause complete dimensional collapse, but too close for any possibility of escape. High Scholar, she said into the comm. Tell Earth that Captain Sarah Chun and the crew of the U.S. Defiance remembered our debts. Tell them we kept our word. Captain, Velnari's voice broke through the static. There is something you must know. 3 centuries ago, when your grandmother visited our world, she asked our greatest scholars a question. She wanted to know if our species believed in souls, in consciousness that survives beyond death. Sarah's hand hovered over the reactor override. What did you tell her? We told her that consciousness, once awakened to true understanding, becomes part of the eternal fabric of the universe itself. Captain Chun, your grandmother's curiosity, your species' loyalty, these things have become part of who we are. You will not be forgotten. Not ever. Sarah smiled, thinking of her grandmother's stories, of crystal gardens floating above gas giants, of gentle scholars who had given humanity the stars. Veltar Nesh Kolani, she whispered. Until the stars grow cold, Velnari replied. Sarah activated the reactor overload. The explosion that followed could be seen across 7 star systems. When the light faded, the Devourer was gone, ejected from reality itself. The Zephyrian fleet found themselves alone in normal space, orbiting a star that burned bright and steady once again. In the wreckage of the Defiance, there was no trace of human remains. But the Zephyrians knew that somewhere in the fabric of space-time itself, 43 souls had become part of something eternal. The galaxy was about to learn what it meant to owe humanity a debt. High Scholar Velnari stood in the observation deck of the Eternal Dawn, watching the gentle rotation of Kepler 442's restored star through the crystalline viewport. 3 weeks had passed since the Defiance's sacrifice, and the Zephyrian fleet was preparing for its next phase of existence. For the first time in 3 centuries, they were no longer refugees. The story of humanity's intervention had spread across the galaxy faster than any hyperspace transmission. The Zephyrian survivors had shared their recordings of the battle, the communications between Sarachun and their fleet, and, most importantly, the revelation that a single human ship had succeeded where the combined might of 47 star systems had failed. But it wasn't just the tactical victory that captured the galaxy's attention. It was the why. Velnari reviewed the message queue on his personal display, scrolling through hundreds of communications from species across known space. Diplomats, military commanders, scholars, and traders, all asking the same fundamental question. Why had humanity risked everything for a debt that was 3 centuries old? The first response had come from the Kethmori hegemony. The crystalline beings who measured their lifespans in millennia had been among the first to make contact with Earth after the Zephyrian introduction. Their message was formal, precise, and deeply puzzled. To the survivors of Zephyr, we have observed the human intervention with great interest. Our calculations suggest this action was strategically illogical. The probability of success was less than 0.3%, and the potential gain for human civilization was negligible. We request clarification of human motivations for further analysis. Velnari had smiled at that. The Kethmori, for all their wisdom and longevity, had never understood the concept of emotional debt. Their society was built on logical exchanges, knowledge for resources, protection for territory, alliance for mutual benefit. The idea that an entire species would remember a kindness across 3 centuries and act on it without expectation of reward was literally incomprehensible to them. The second response had been very different. The Nexus Collective, a machine consciousness that spanned 12 star systems, had sent a message that was both analytical and strangely wistful. Query: how does a species maintain cultural memory across 15-plus generations without central database? Query: how does emotional attachment translate into tactical decision-making? Observation: human behavior suggests memory storage system more sophisticated than biological neural networks should allow. Request: cultural exchange to study human memory preservation techniques. But it was the third message that had made Velnari understand the true scope of what was happening. It came from the Thractii Empire, a militaristic species that controlled one of the galaxy's major trade routes. The Thractii were known for their pragmatism and their absolute commitment to power dynamics. They respected strength, cunning, and tactical superiority. They had never shown interest in human civilization before, considering Earth's modest 12-system confederation to be beneath their notice. Their message was brief and direct. The Thractii Empire acknowledges the combat effectiveness of human loyalty protocols. We wish to discuss mutual defense agreements. In the span of 3 weeks, humanity had gone from a minor galactic player to something that major powers were actively courting. All because Captain Sarachun had refused to let an old friend die alone. Velnari activated his communication array and connected to the human embassy on New Geneva Station. Ambassador Patricia Williams appeared on his screen, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the kind of patient expression that came from decades of diplomatic service. High Scholar, she greeted him with a respectful bow. I trust the fleet is settling in well at the Kepler 442 system. Indeed, Ambassador. Your offer to share the system has been more generous than we could have hoped. But I'm contacting you about a different matter entirely. Williams leaned forward, her expression growing serious. The galactic response to the Defiance incident. Precisely. High Scholar, in 3 weeks, we have received formal diplomatic overtures from 17 major civilizations. Trade proposals, defense pacts, cultural exchange programs, all directed toward Earth. The galaxy is suddenly very interested in understanding humanity. Williams nodded slowly. We've been monitoring the communications traffic. It's unprecedented. Species that have ignored us for decades are now requesting formal meetings with our diplomatic corps. Ambassador, I need you to understand something crucial, Velnari said, moving closer to his screen. The galaxy operates on certain fundamental principles. Power, resources, strategic advantage. These things determine relationships between species. What your Captain Shun did breaks every rule of interstellar politics. How so? She acted against logical self-interest. She sacrificed valuable military assets for no strategic gain. Most importantly, she honored a debt that was older than most civilizations' recorded histories. In the galaxy's political framework, this makes humans either insane or impossibly dangerous. Williams raised an eyebrow. And which do they think we are? Both. And that's exactly why you're about to become the most powerful species in known space. Over the following months, the transformation was remarkable to observe. The first sign came when the Altarian Trade Confederation, a notoriously cautious merchant alliance, offered humanity exclusive trading rights for their exotic matter technologies. Their reasoning, according to internal communications that the Zephyrians intercepted, was simple. If humans honor 3-century-old debts, they will honor commercial contracts indefinitely. The second sign was when the Vegan Republic, locked in a border dispute with the Centauri hegemony, requested human mediation. Not because Earth had superior military force or political influence, but because both sides trusted that human arbitrators would remember their decisions and enforce them fairly over generations. But the real watershed moment came when the ancient Arconian remnant made an unprecedented request. The Arconians were the oldest known spacefaring civilization, with records dating back over 50,000 years. They had watched the rise and fall of hundreds of species, had survived cosmic catastrophes that had wiped out entire galactic arms. They were the galaxy's memory keepers, the neutral observers who recorded history without judgment. Their message to Earth was simple. We wish to share our archives with humanity. We believe your species may be uniquely qualified to be the galaxy's next custodians. Ambassador Williams found herself sitting across from Arconian High Archivist Zurvash in a meeting room aboard the neutral station Harmony Point. The Arconian was an impressive figure, nearly 3 meters tall, with chitinous plates that had been inscribed with the histories of 1,000 worlds. Each marking on Zurvash's carapace represented a civilization that had trusted the Arconians with their stories. Ambassador Williams, Zurvash began his translation device rendering his clicks and whistles into precise standard. My people have observed galactic civilization for millennia. We have seen species rise to great heights through conquest, through technological advancement, through economic manipulation. But we have never seen a species gain influence through the simple act of keeping its word. Williams chose her words carefully. High Archivist, I think you may be overestimating the significance of Captain Chen's actions. She was honoring a debt, yes, but she was also protecting a species from extinction. Most humans would have made the same choice. Exactly, Zurvash clicked what might have been approval. Most humans. This is not normal behavior for a spacefaring species, Ambassador. Most civilizations become increasingly pragmatic as they expand beyond their home systems. Survival in space requires difficult choices, calculated risks, the willingness to sacrifice idealism for necessity. The Arconian leaned forward, his compound eyes reflecting the soft light of the meeting room. But humans seem to become more idealistic as they expand, not less. Your colonies send resources back to Earth not because they are required to, but because they want to. Your military protects trade routes for species that offer minimal strategic value because you gave your word that you would. Your diplomats spend decades learning alien customs not to gain advantage, but to show respect. Williams felt a chill of understanding. You're saying that our approach to interstellar relations is fundamentally different from everyone else's. I'm saying that your approach creates a type of soft power that the galaxy has never seen before. When the Kethmori make an alliance, Both parties calculate the exact benefits and costs. When the Thractii offer protection, the price is clearly stated. But when humans make agreements, other species begin to trust that those agreements will outlive governments, outlive generations, outlive the very stars themselves. Zurvash activated a holographic display that showed the galactic political map. Human space appeared as a modest cluster of 12 systems, but surrounding it was a growing web of connections, trade routes, mutual defense pacts, cultural exchange programs, research collaborations. In just 6 months since the Defiance incident, humanity had become the hub of an informal network that spanned a third of known space. High Archivist, Williams said slowly, are you suggesting that the galaxy is reorganizing itself around human reliability? I'm suggesting that the galaxy has discovered something it didn't know it was missing, a species that other species can trust absolutely. Not because humans are more powerful or more advanced, but because they're more predictable. When a human says, I will remember this, other species are beginning to understand that they mean it literally. The implications were staggering. Williams thought about the communications that had been flooding Earth's diplomatic channels. Requests for human arbitration in disputes, proposals for long-term research collaborations, invitations to join defense alliances that had previously excluded smaller powers. What do your archives tell you about species that gained this kind of influence? She asked. Zurvash was quiet for a long moment. His mandibles clicking in what Williams had learned was the Arconian equivalent of deep thought. In our 50,000 years of observation, we have recorded only 3 other species that gained galaxy-wide influence through trustworthiness rather than force. All 3 became the foundation of the galactic order for their respective eras. And what happened to them? They transcended their physical limitations and became something greater. The Vashtii became the guardians of galactic law. Their consciousness spread across 1,000 worlds to ensure justice. The Mordun became the keepers of galactic memory, preserving the knowledge of 10 million species. The Ethkari became the shepherds of galactic evolution, guiding younger species toward wisdom and enlightenment. Williams felt her breath catch. And you think humanity is becoming the 4th? Ambassador Williams, 6 months ago, if I had told you that a single human ship would change the balance of galactic power by keeping a 3-century-old promise, would you have believed me? She shook her head. The galaxy is watching humanity very carefully now. Every action your species takes is being analyzed, cataloged, and remembered. You have gained something that no weapon can provide, and no treaty can guarantee. You have gained the absolute trust of other species. Zurvash paused, his ancient eyes reflecting depths of wisdom that Williams could barely comprehend. The question now is what humanity will do with that trust. Because whatever you choose, the galaxy will follow. As Williams left the meeting, she thought about Captain Sarachun, about the Defiance, about 43 souls who had chosen honor over survival. They had intended to repay an old debt. Instead, they had purchased humanity's future with their sacrifice. The galaxy was about to learn that when humans made a promise, they kept it forever. And that forever was going to be a very long time indeed.